It is a wedding reception, 9:40 in the evening. The groom's co-worker has just been introduced to you for the fourth time tonight. You shake her hand, you smile, you say it's great to finally meet her. Her name arrives in your ear and is gone before the handshake ends. You spend the next 4 minutes of conversation doing complex emotional math, nodding warmly while running a search query. Your own brain refuses to return. Here is what almost nobody at that wedding understands, including you. What just happened in your head has nothing to do with how much you care. But to understand what actually happened, we need to look at something psychology discovered decades before either of you were born. This happens to nearly everyone, but for some people, it happens constantly. Names slide out of memory within seconds, while everything else about the person, their voice, their story, the way they laughed at something, stays perfectly intact. And the social world has decided what this means. It has decided, quietly and without evidence, that forgetting a name is a small moral failure. A sign you weren't really listening, a sign the other person didn't register as important. What's missing from that verdict is the actual research. Cognitive scientists have understood for decades that names occupy a strange, almost hostile position in human memory, different from nearly every other kind of information your brain handles. And the people most affected by this aren't careless. Often, they're the opposite. People whose minds are wired for connection, story, and emotional nuance, and weak, specifically, at holding on to a single arbitrary sound. This was never about indifference. It was about architecture. When a piece of information has no story attached to it, no emotional charge, no connection to anything you already know, the brain treats it the way it treats noise. Not because the brain is broken, because the brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. Everything seemed like a simple memory failure. Until research revealed that the failure was never really about memory at all. In 1987, two researchers, McWeeny and Ellis, ran an experiment that exposed something strange about how the brain treats identical words. Two groups were shown the same photograph of a man. One group was told his job was baker. The other group was told his surname was Baker. Same 5 letters, same sound. Days later, the group who learned the occupation remembered it dramatically better than the group who learned the name. Picture the moment researchers first saw the gap in the data. 2 identical words splitting so cleanly down the middle of memory. Not the word itself, the web it's attached to. Not what you heard, what it connected to. Not memory strength, memory architecture. The word baker, the job triggers flour, ovens, early mornings, warmth, a dozen mental doors swinging open at once. The word baker, the surname, triggers nothing. It floats, unattached, with nowhere to land. This is the condition every name enters under, stripped of context, offered once, quickly, usually at the exact moment your brain is busy managing something else entirely, your posture, your tone, whether you're making the right amount of eye contact. A name doesn't get a fair chance to be remembered. It gets handed to a brain that is already at full capacity, doing 6 other jobs at once, and asked to file itself without any help. But here is where the story takes a darker turn, because the moment usually gets worse before it gets better. Ask yourself this: if the name simply didn't register, why does the panic of forgetting it feel like proof that you weren't paying attention at all? In 1973, psychologist Malcolm Briner documented something now called the next in line effect. People waiting their turn to speak in a group showed sharply reduced memory for whatever the person right before them had just said, because internally they had already left the conversation, rehearsing their own next move. This is the condition almost everyone is in during an introduction. You are not simply receiving a name. You are simultaneously managing your own performance. What to say next, how to seem comfortable, whether the handshake lasted too long. The name arrives into a mind that has already, quietly, moved on to itself. And once it's gone, something crueler happens. The instant you notice the name is missing, anxiety activates. Now your attention splits again, half on the conversation, half on a frantic internal search for a word that was never properly stored in the first place. The harder you search, the more elusive it becomes. It isn't gone, it's blocked, buried under your own stress response, standing exactly where you need to reach. The name was never lost. It was never filed. You cannot lose what you never put down. This is the part that flips the entire social verdict on its head. Because the people most prone to this pattern tend to share a specific cognitive trait, they are associative thinkers. Their memory is built around story, emotion, and meaning rather than isolated labels. Ask them what someone said that genuinely moved them 3 years ago, and they may answer instantly. Ask them that same person's name, and they may draw a complete blank. This is not a flaw in the mind. It is a mind built for exactly the kind of attention most people claim to want from others, and weak, specifically, at the single mechanical task that has nothing to do with that attention at all. Stay with me, because what comes next is the part nobody actually says out loud. Here is the truth, sitting underneath all of this. The world was told that forgetting a name means you didn't care. The research says the opposite is often closer to the truth. The brain that forgets the label is frequently the brain that was busiest absorbing everything else. The feeling in the room, the story being told, the person underneath the syllables. The world calls this carelessness. Psychology calls it a mismatch between an ancient visual memory system and a comparatively recent invention, the spoken name, that human cognition was never built to prioritize. The associative mind calls it simply paying attention to what actually mattered. There is a quiet irony at the center of all this. The people who happen to be skilled at retaining names, often for reasons that have nothing to do with emotional depth, receive social credit they may not have earned. Warmth, attentiveness, care. And the people who forget, despite genuinely caring, quietly absorb blame they didn't earn either. Society built an entire trust signal on top of a cognitive accident. For years, this has gone almost completely unexamined, not because the evidence wasn't there, because nobody benefits from questioning a system that already feels intuitive. We mistake a skill for a virtue and a glitch for a sin. This is not a story about names. It is a story about how often human judgment mistakes a neutral mechanism for a moral statement. The same pattern shows up everywhere. Forgetting a birthday, mixing up a small detail, missing a text for a day. Each one gets quietly read as evidence of what someone feels, when it may simply be evidence of what their mind was built to prioritize in that moment. If you've spent years quietly believing that forgetting names makes you careless, the research suggests something more useful. Build the bridge manually. Repeat the name immediately. Attach it to an image, a story, anything with texture. You're not fixing a character flaw, you're doing manually what an associative brain won't do automatically. Most people will keep reading this as a verdict on character. Now you know it almost never was one. The reception is quieter now. Most of the lights have dimmed. The co-worker's name still hasn't surfaced. But something else has. The conversation you had, the story she told about her sister, the way she laughed at the toast, that's still there, intact, untouched. It was never about the name. It never really is.